government can respond. In his view, and I'm quoting, "The constant crisis atmosphere contrarianism of the current media and internet environment overwhelms the signal-to-noise ratio and preoccupies government with addressing blaring non-issues." And I end the quote at that point. I don't agree with the writer's conclusion that this could lead to an increasing number of important issues being considered by non-democratic institutions. The public service, which is democratically accountable through ministers, has a crucial role in ensuring that this bleak prediction does not come to pass. We in the public service must protect democracy, not only through our traditional role of providing advice to ministers, but by creating better mechanisms for engaging with citizens. I don't mean that public servants should have a carte blanche. We must all adhere to our respective codes of conduct. I'm not suggesting public servants should become involved in partisan political debate. We need to remember the vital importance of remaining impartial and apolitical, and of retaining public and political trust. That said, the new media hold tremendous potential for creating better ways of engaging with citizens. The internet and social media provide us with tools that have great potential to improve both democratic debate and the way government is conducted. Some of the most valuable and constructive contributions to Australia's policy debate now occur on the net, such as Australian Policy Online and the Lowy Interpreter. Beyond providing an alternative medium for debate, the new technology gives us in the public service new ways to engage with citizens that could be far-reaching in their impact. I'm optimistic about our ability to respond to these changes. Last year, we produced a blueprint in the APS for reform of the Australian Public Service called Ahead of the Game, which aims to respond to the dilemmas Giddens describes. Its overarching goal is to improve the way we deliver services to citizens. Many of the proposals in Ahead of the Game are directly focused on this goal, both by improving services and by finding new ways to collaborate with citizens both before and after decisions are made. In a world where citizens are more demanding than ever, we need to bolster the relationship between government and the community. Public servants are held in high regard by the public. A recent poll conducted by Roy Morgan Research found that most respondents ranked public sector workers, such as nurses, school teachers, police, highly for their honesty and ethical standards. The integrity of government in Australia is also ranked very highly in international comparisons. A highly trusted and fully effective public service will engage with citizens in a wide range of ways that reflect changing needs and new technologies. To engage more effectively, we need to make full use of new communications technologies. The report of the Government 2.0 Task Force makes a compelling case for using the internet and other new technologies to make government more open, accountable, responsible and efficient. It shows how the new tools will give public servants the opportunity to engage with and respond to the community. I'm encouraged that almost all the task force's recommendations were accepted by government, although still a lot more work needed to put them into practice. I commend this conference for selecting citizen engagement in policy and service delivery as the theme for your discussions. This is an issue that requires the intention and consideration of all of us. And so to conclude, improving citizen engagement is just one of the ways our conception of democracy can change and grow for the better. Democracy should mean more than just our right to vote in elections every 3 or 4 years. Good government has always required effective communication and collaboration between government and citizens. Going right back to the emergence of the right to petition Parliament, which emerged from the Glorious Revolution, the conversation between government and the citizens has been a crucial feature of democracy. Changes in society and in the economy demand new and better ways for that conversation to occur. Although the explosion of communication media has made that conversation rather noisy, new information technology also provides us with some tools to help constructive dialogue. The Australian Public Service has a key role in facilitating that process. Notwithstanding the shifts I've described, we have a strong system of checks and balances between various sources of power and influence. Through constitutions and conventions, the two chambers of Parliament, a professional and impartial public service, political contest, elections, the media, think tanks, universities, courts and tribunals, the federal system, and the participation of citizens themselves directly. Our democracy is one of the strongest and most vibrant in the world, but as in all democracies, there are things we can improve. We should not be afraid of change. John Paterson was never afraid to say what he thought. He was a blunt, resourceful advocate for good policy thinking and has inspired those who followed him. The institutions of government will continue to evolve, the balance between the various parts may shift, and the practice of democracy will grow. Our overriding goal should be to ensure that amidst all this change, we keep sight of the central purpose of democracy, to ensure good government under the authority of the people to the greatest benefit of the greatest number of people. As public servants, we may all be Benthamite utilitarians in practice, but this fits neatly with the Constitution, legislation enacted under it, and the involving conventions which give them life and guide our work. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. There's a chance for you to ask any questions. Maybe I could ask you, the media and the public servant, what should the relationship be? How should the public servant engage with the media?
Well, if you're referring to the traditional media, the print media and the broadcast media, I would say the public servant should approach both with immense caution and discretion and leave the hard bits to ministers. I think if you take off from that point in my speech where I said that commercial imperatives seem to be driving ever more vigorous populism in most parts of the media, this is creating a world where it's very dangerous for public servants to be active. Now, there are exceptions to that, being those public servants or that class of public servants who exist within some of the independent branches of the executive, if I could put it in those terms. But even there are conventions such that, for instance, such public servants should not be reflecting on policy issues and should not be publishing their advice on policy issues, for example. And those public servants should not be engaged in a way that appears to align them with one side of politics rather than the other. And when you were chair of the ACCC, you were faultless in your ability to step around all those sorts of problems. But Alan, since you left, I think the media's got far more rabid than it was when you were there.
We heard an impassioned plea to the exact contrary last night by Mr. George Megalogenis, who said that in this era, all information reaches the public anyway, and that the public service therefore should try to engage more. But it was pointed out to him that possibly he had a kind of interest in that.
Well, I don't agree with George. Everybody in this room would know that not all information does reach the public anyway, even though there are some elements in the media who have set up organisations to promote the cause that should be so, particularly News Corp. And I think that there are many parts of what government does and the information on which it rests, which in the interest of the the continuity in our system of government should remain shielded from general public view. And indeed, the recent debates about freedom of information have been largely motivated by a desire for greater efficiency on the part of some news outlets in getting ready access to information within government that might provide the basis for good stories. And you'll be surprised to hear that it's very rare are those good stories loaded with praise for the work that we and others do. So democracy could get choked to death if all the information within government were available, and perhaps George was thinking about a particular subset of the information within government, but I'd be very worried about a lot of the national security materials being generally available. I'd be very worried about impacts on the markets from making available a lot of the economic analysis and advice that's done within government. One could go on. As to whether public servants should be a participant in that debate, I actually think that you can't have responsible government in the sense that we do, where ministers are the ones that are accountable into the parliament for the executive branch of government, and then beneath ministers have a lot of public servants who are entering the public domain and speculating on policy, commenting on policy, advocating for policy or whatever. All that does is simply undermine ministers. Admittedly, it might take us well in the direction of, say, the American system of government, but the prerequisite for the American system of government is that senior public servants are aligned with a particular party and are not, as in our tradition, seen to be apolitical and impartial in the way they do their work and the way they construct and give advice in the national interest, loyally to the government of the day.
Terry, my name's Susan McCaddy. I'm from the New South Wales Department of Finance and Services. I'm very interested in Ahead of the Game. I think it's an ambitious program, and the fact that capability is a core part of that program in terms of building capability within the public service to respond to new challenges. I'm interested to know whether you're seeing early indications of change in response to the report and the initiatives that it has in place, and whether you're taking heart from any of that.
Yes, I am. Firstly, the government accepted all of the recommendations without qualification shortly after the report was released. Secondly, what was in the report reflected a consensus view arrived at with what is now called the Secretary's Board, that is the leadership of the public service that rests with the 20 secretaries and the Public Service Commissioner in the context of the Australian Public Service. Nearly all of the recommendations are well down the path towards implementation, and some have been fully implemented. There are some exceptions to that, relatively few in number, where the constraint has been available resources rather than whether or not we should do the things that I'm talking about. There's been a lot more emphasis placed on the identification of talent, for example, and how that can be further developed. And the Public Service Commission has actually been given resources by all the departments, willingly doing so, in order that it is better equipped to act on behalf of the entire public service in this area of identifying talent, developing talent, and better preparing the leadership groups for the public service into the future. So I think it's all going very nicely, and it's still the case that although there have been some changes at the level of who are the secretaries in the Australian Public Service, nonetheless the Secretaries Board as a group, which is very collegial, remains very committed to seeing through the recommendations in the report Ahead of the Game.
Terry, I was going to ask you if there's not a sixth dilemma in this country, which is the incredible policy failure for Indigenous people.
I'm having trouble hearing you.
I was wondering if there's a sixth dilemma, and that is the incredible policy failure for our Indigenous people in this country, which I was interested to hear some of your comments maybe on the short-term nature of government, 4-year cycles or 3-year cycles, chop and change of programs, stop and change of priorities, and in the meantime, they are one of the most incredibly disadvantaged people in the world, and I just wonder whether that should not be high on the agenda.